Boeing's earnings report is in. The company beat Wall Street expectations in the fourth quarter while working to dig itself out of a string of crises that tarnished its reputation.
Shares moving higher today. On Friday, the aerospace giant won approval to raise the production numbers for its 737 MAX.
Something significant is unfolding inside the North American aerospace industry. And it is not happening through dramatic announcements or overnight factory closures. It is happening through contracts, through infrastructure expansion, through policy adjustments, and through long-term capital allocation decisions that slowly reshape industrial power. For decades, Boeing symbolized American aerospace dominance. Its assembly facilities in Washington State, Missouri, Kansas, and South Carolina supported hundreds of thousands of direct and indirect jobs. Entire communities developed around aerospace production. Local suppliers depended on steady procurement. Engineers built long-term careers inside one of the most recognizable manufacturing brands in the world. Boeing was not just a corporation. It was a pillar of regional economic stability. But over the past several years, multiple pressures have converged at the same time. Safety incidents triggered federal investigations. Regulatory oversight intensified. The Federal Aviation Administration imposed financial penalties tied to compliance failures and production quality concerns. While fines measured in millions of dollars may appear modest compared to Boeing's revenue, which runs into tens of billions annually, they represent something more important: heightened scrutiny. When regulators transition from warnings to enforcement, it usually signals deeper operational issues rather than isolated mistakes. Leadership changes have also added to uncertainty. Executive restructuring at the highest level often reflects pressure from shareholders, regulators, and customers demanding improved performance. Leadership transitions during operational turbulence typically coincide with strategic reassessment. Markets responded quickly. Boeing stock experienced volatility as investors reassessed exposure to production delays, supply chain risks, and reputational damage. Billions of dollars in market capitalization fluctuated during periods of instability. Institutional investors began questioning long-term risk management inside the company. However, stock volatility alone does not define industrial transformation. The real shift is visible in where contracts are being executed and where new capital investment is flowing. Over the past several years, aerospace production expansion that historically remained concentrated inside the United States has increasingly extended into Canada. This expansion did not occur overnight. It began gradually. Initial collaboration often involved engineering partnerships, component manufacturing agreements, and research integration. These smaller projects created operational familiarity between firms and Canadian industrial partners. Then larger commitments followed. Today, provinces like Quebec and Ontario have secured multi-year aerospace agreements covering avionics systems, advanced component manufacturing, aircraft maintenance services, and integration support tied to major international platforms. These contracts are not short-term outsourcing arrangements. They are embedded into long-term production pipelines. Winnipeg has expanded aerospace infrastructure with significant facility growth, supporting advanced materials handling and climate-controlled storage for sensitive aerospace components. Expansion at that scale requires long-term financial forecasting and confidence in sustained production demand. The key question many observers ask is whether Canada has overtaken U.S. aerospace production. The accurate answer is more nuanced. Canada has not replaced the United States as the dominant center of aircraft assembly or design authority, but Canada is capturing a growing share of incremental aerospace investment. And incremental investment determines future capacity. That distinction is critical. The United States still controls major aircraft assembly programs and retains core technological leadership. Boeing's primary design authority and key production lines remain rooted in U.S. facilities. Strategic defense contracts continue anchoring substantial domestic aerospace employment. However, when corporations evaluate expansion, meaning new facilities, additional workforce growth, and new supply chain investments, they analyze policy stability, cost structure, labor predictability, and regulatory clarity. In recent years, U.S. trade policy introduced tariffs on imported aircraft components and aerospace inputs with the objective of strengthening domestic manufacturing. The intention behind tariffs is straightforward: increase competitiveness of local production by raising costs of foreign alternatives. However, aerospace supply chains are highly globalized and deeply specialized. Aircraft production relies on advanced composites sourced internationally, specialized avionics components, precision engineering materials, complex subsystems produced across multiple countries. If tariffs increase input costs or introduce uncertainty around cross-border movement of components, production planning becomes more complex. Manufacturers working on multi-decade aircraft platforms require cost predictability across the life cycle of development and production. Uncertainty introduces risk premiums. When risk rises, companies reassess where to allocate future expansion capital. Industry analysts have argued that tariff volatility complicated procurement planning and added administrative complexity to supply chains. Canada responded strategically during this period. Instead of reacting defensively, policymakers implemented structured aerospace growth strategies supported by multi-billion-dollar industrial programs and defense procurement investments. Defense contracts play a foundational role in aerospace stability because they guarantee baseline production demand. When governments commit to long-term defense modernization programs, manufacturers receive predictable revenue streams. That stability encourages suppliers to invest in equipment, workforce training, and infrastructure expansion. Guaranteed volume reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty attracts ecosystem development. Ecosystem development strengthens competitiveness. Over time, clusters form. The Montreal to Toronto corridor now represents one of North America's most integrated aerospace ecosystems. Universities in the region produce specialized aerospace engineers. Research institutions collaborate directly with manufacturers to develop next-generation propulsion systems, advanced composites, automation technologies, and sustainable aviation innovations. Suppliers operate geographically close to assembly partners, reducing logistics friction and improving coordination efficiency. That physical proximity improves production agility. From an economic perspective, Canada's aerospace sector contributes billions annually to GDP and supports tens of thousands of skilled workers across manufacturing, engineering, maintenance, and research roles. Importantly, many of these positions are high-wage technical jobs requiring advanced education and specialized certification. These roles increase industrial depth. However, it would be inaccurate to interpret expansion in Canada as immediate displacement of U.S. jobs. Boeing continues operating large-scale production facilities within the United States. Core Aircraft Design Authority remains centralized domestically. Strategic defense platforms remain anchored in U.S. production networks. The company publicly states its commitment to operations in both countries. The key observation lies not in contraction, but in diversification. When companies expand operations in multiple jurisdictions, they reduce exposure to single-country risk and optimize operational flexibility. Expansion decisions reveal where marginal growth capital is allocated. If incremental investment flows toward Canada at a faster rate than new domestic capacity expansion, that signals comparative advantage emerging in that region for certain program categories. This situation generates debate. Some policymakers argue that protectionist tariffs and stricter regulatory enforcement protect national security interests and ensure industrial sovereignty. They contend that maintaining strong domestic aerospace capability reduces vulnerability during geopolitical instability. Their argument emphasizes strategic independence. Critics respond that unpredictable policy changes and regulatory shifts create uncertainty that discourages long-term capital investment. They argue that corporations prefer stable environments where tax structures, trade frameworks, and regulatory standards remain predictable across decades. In this framework, capital migrates toward stability rather than purely toward cost reduction. Airlines also monitor these dynamics carefully because aircraft production delays directly influence fleet replacement strategies. Commercial airlines plan capacity expansion years in advance based on projected aircraft delivery timelines. If manufacturing disruptions delay deliveries, airlines must adjust route expansion, lease agreements, and operational planning. Those adjustments influence pricing models and competitive positioning. Thus, production geography shifts indirectly affect global aviation markets. The aerospace industry operates as an interconnected system spanning multiple nations. Components manufactured in one country may be assembled in another and certified by regulators elsewhere. Defense programs often involve cross-border collaboration among allied nations. Research initiatives frequently involve international partnerships. When one node in this network expands, it strengthens its position within the global system. Canada's strategic investments position it as a stable node integrated into that broader network. Its aerospace infrastructure growth reflects deliberate alignment with global production chains rather than isolated domestic development. However, this shift raises important questions about long-term industrial balance. Is this transition temporary, driven primarily by current policy conditions, or is it part of a structural realignment in North American aerospace investment? If U.S. policymakers implement stable long-term industrial incentives and reduce regulatory unpredictability, domestic expansion could accelerate again. If Canada continues strengthening its aerospace ecosystem through sustained investment and contract acquisition, its role within global production networks will deepen further. Both trajectories remain possible. Capital allocation over the next 5 to 10 years will determine direction. It is important to avoid framing this development as sudden collapse. Factories remain operational. Engineers continue designing advanced aircraft systems. Supply chains continue functioning. The transformation is gradual rather than catastrophic, but gradual shifts accumulate. Industrial power rarely changes overnight. It changes through repeated investment decisions that slowly adjust production geography. The aerospace landscape of North America is currently undergoing that adjustment, and the final configuration will depend on policy stability, workforce development, technological innovation, and global demand growth. Change is already underway. The competitive advantage will belong to the region that demonstrates consistency, infrastructure depth, and long-term industrial strategy. The map of aerospace power across the continent is not fixed. It is being redrawn through investment patterns and contract allocation, and the outcome remains open.